Yeah, so we will turn back to some of the topics that Shell also mentioned, specifically talking more about the migration and the tourism chapter of the report, which obviously also ties into some of the more general considerations on the Nordic level that we have discussed so far. To some extent, we will also move a little bit away from the capital regions and talk more about the municipalities and the regions as whole. So I'm going to talk first about migration, and then Lise will follow with some presentations on the tourism chapter. But migration, to map migration statistically, is a very moving target. So I just want to not discuss the data very much, but we would just make a few comments saying that when we consider internal migration versus international migration, it's a point of departure of the people moving into an administrative unit. So whether the administrative unit was outside the country of movement or inside. We talk about immigration on national scale. Moving down to regional municipal level, we talk about in-migration and out-migration instead. And then, of course, net migration is a very important indicator on this and is calculated as the difference between either immigration and out-immigration or in-migration, out-migration, usually as a plus or minus value that denominates the region in question. So as Shell also said, the population growth we have in this chapter we calculated back to 1990, therefore there's a slight difference in the numbers, but they do match up. In 1990 there were 23.2 million inhabitants in the whole Nordic region, and today we stand at these 26.5, giving a total of these 3.3 million and an increase of 14%. However, what's interesting is that the natural increase only accounts for 1/3 of this. And that means that the net immigration accounts for the other 2/3. This differs quite a bit between the countries, between the Nordic countries. And we have tried to group them into these 4 categories. So the first group of the Scandinavian countries and Åland is where these 1/3, 2/3 component determines the migration rates. Whereas in Greenland and Faroe Islands, the natural increase is quite high. This is then offset by high immigration rates, meaning that they have these stable populations over these 25 years. Finland is in this group of its own, with natural increase and immigration roughly equaling the same value. And then Iceland is in a group of its own because they also have a very high natural increase, which is not offset by such a high immigration, but that's because it differs quite a bit over time. With where we see back from 1990 and up to 2014, natural increase is more or less stable, whereas migration rates vary considerably. So in total over these 25 years, net immigration doesn't account for such a big population change. Also, we haven't actually dealt with this very much in the chapter of the report, but just since this is of very high interest, of course, where these migrants come from also varies quite a bit over time. I've just taken the examples of immigrants into Denmark, and we group them in these Nordic countries, the BSR being Germany, Poland, and the Baltic countries, the rest of the EU and the US, so as a reflection on a different type of country, and then Syria as another group. And we see that it varies quite a bit. And also, what is interesting is that, of course, we see geopolitically that the Baltic countries, after they joined the EU mobility agreements, they were able to move, but obviously the crisis meant something for their numbers. And similarly, also between the Nordic countries, it changes quite a bit over time who's moving where. And I just want to make this point that this is not actually on nationalities, this is where people come from. So basically, we don't know if all these Americans coming back to Denmark in 2011 are Danes who have come back after a period of time over there, or where they're from. But of course it gives some indication of the type of immigrants we're talking about. And if we're moving down to the regional and municipal level, and looking at the regional patterns. If we first look at the regional maps here, it's quite clear. I mean, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, on the regional level, positive net migration is the main component of movement on the regional level, which is probably a bit surprising considering these 30 functional urban regions are actually not located up in these most northern regions, but they still manage to have a positive net migration on regional level. Obviously, the municipal picture is quite much more complex. A general confirmation of the urbanization process with even the regional centers like Ulo, Luleå, Umeå, and Tromsø up in the north, and even Nuuk, the Nuuk municipality in Greenland, attracting a population probably from the surrounding municipalities, but also some exceptions as to what Kjell also mentioned about these municipalities having very large industries that are if they have been in growth in this period of time, they would have attracted quite a bit of labor force, foreign as well as internal. And then moving back into the importance of this international immigration. Obviously, the capital regions still attract the majority in absolute numbers, but on municipal level, the out-migration, and if we do go back to the previous one, and look at for instance, the large municipalities up in the north of Sweden where they have a lot of depopulation. This depopulation is actually offset to some extent by international immigration, meaning that either it diminishes the decrease or it makes it possible for them to have a stable population or in some extent even have a population growth. And then, if I have time, just some general consideration on what does this mean, this population number, but why is this so important? Of course, for a small municipality, if they can maintain or increase their population, the transfers based only on population numbers, they will be able to maintain that or even increase their transfers, making it possible for them to maintain services. And this has even if the numbers are very small, the effect in very small communities can be quite profound. Obviously, there's also this potential for new opportunities in the local labor market if this is not attracting, if it's not a labor market that has attracted a demand for labor but has found itself in surplus of labor suddenly, that there will be new needs and new potential in these small municipalities. Obviously, the international immigration is also a reflection of a local demand for labor. It can either be some of these very large firms need for specialized employees that they're not able to find, for hospitals, demands for doctors, or where they are unable to attract enough internal labor to move to these places. And then there are also some sectors where we know that international employees is a big part of the population, and one of them being tourism, where a lot of the growth, or at least the seasonal growth, in some of these resorts or skiing destinations are actually employing large numbers of international immigrants. On that very nice keyword on tourism, it's Lise's turn.
One at a time.
Yeah. So one common way to measure tourism development is to look at the number of, or the volumes of tourists coming into regions. And the most common way is to look at the overnight stays. And overnight stays doesn't capture the day visitors, for example, from cruise ships. So we've also been collecting data on cruise tourism for the report, but here I'll focus on the overnight stays. And you can see the dark, on this map, the dark blue color. The darkest blue color is where there's been an increase of more than 15% during the period 2008 to 2014. And the darkest red has had a decrease of 15%, of more than 15%. And we can observe that there's been a very extensive growth in Iceland, where the lowest growth was found in Vesturland with 62%, and the highest was 176% during this period in Suðurnes, which is the region where the international airport is located. And in Sweden, there's also been a growth during this period, or an upward trend in most of the regions. In Finland, it's a more varied picture we see, and also Olsen has had a decrease. In Denmark, there's been a decrease in some of the regions, and the highest increase we've seen in the capital region with the 29%. Greenland has had a decrease, and also in Norway we see that there's been a tendency that there's been quite a high decrease in most of the regions, as high as 47% in Sogn og Fjordane. This is a map of the total number of overnight stays in 2014. So the size of the circle indicates the number, and here we can see that there's been a concentration to the capitals and other urban regions, and also to the coastlines of Denmark and Norway, and the Arctic destinations of particularly Finland and Sweden. And the green parts of the circles show the share of the overnight stays that have been made by nationals from within the same country. So they form the majority in most of the regions, actually, across the Nordic countries, with the exception of Iceland, where there's more of a mix between nationalities. And this map zooms or shows us the division between only the international tourists or overnight stays, and the blue color indicates nationals from other Nordic countries. And particularly in the Faroe Islands, there's a very high share of overnight stays by other Nordic nationals, as high as 72%. And also in Denmark and in southern Sweden, we see that there's a very high share of German nationals. And similarly, thinking of the neighboring countries, in Russia, or in Finland, there's a high share of Russians. It's the dark red color, and especially the regions bordering Russia. And here we also see that there's more of a mix of nationalities, particularly again in all of the regions in Iceland and in Finnish Lapland, also along the Norwegian coast and in the capital regions. So if we, or the statistics we were able to find about the economic impact of tourism comes from the World Tourism Association that uses or that collects data based on a standard statistical framework that's called tourism satellite accounts. And a common way to define the importance of tourism for the economy is to look at inbound tourism as expenditure as a percentage of GDP, and here the increasing overnight stays are also reflected in Iceland. You can see that the importance for the GDP has increased from 4.5% in 2009 to 7.4% in 2013. So Iceland is also the only Nordic country that's above the OECD average, which is 4.7% in 2012. And so in the other Nordic countries, there's been a more steady impact. It hasn't changed much during those years, and in 2013 it was 1.13 or 1.3% in Norway, 1.9% in Denmark, 2.1% in Finland, and 2.5% in Sweden. And we would also have liked to place more focus on the economic impact on the regional level. Of course, the number of overnight stays gives us an indication, but we found that it wasn't possible, or it's not documented in the same way across the Nordic region, the regional impact, and also because of the cross-sectoral nature of the industry, it was difficult. At least within the framework of this project, it wasn't possible. Yeah, thank you.